दोस्तों, अगला सेशन भी हमारा बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है। पूरी दुनिया के अंदर वक्त बेवक्त बहुत किस्म की रैंकिंग्स आती रहती हैं। बहुत सारे लोग सर्वे करते हैं, बहुत सारी इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हैं जो इसके ऊपर काम कर रही हैं। कभी हंगर इंडेक्स का हमारे को देखने को मिलता है, मुख्तलिफ़ किस्म की ये चीज़ें हैं जो आती रहती हैं। इसी तरीके से प्रेस एंड मीडिया के फ्रीडम को लेके भी कुछ रैंकिंग्स आती हैं, जिसके अंदर पिछले कुछ वक्फे के अंदर इंडिया की रैंकिंग, भारत की रैंकिंग काफ़ी नीचे गई है। तो उसी मुद्दे पर आप लोगों को, शायद वरद चले जाएं, उसी मुद्दे पे आप लोगों को बताने के लिए सीमा चिश्ती हमारे बीच में, मैं उनसे रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि वो इस स्टेज पर आएँ और यहाँ पे अपना।
तो अगर किसी से भी कहा जाए कि वो सिद्धार्थ के बाद बोलें, दे शुड ऑल सिंपली रिफ्यूज़ एंड रन अवे। लेकिन मेरे सौभाग्य की बात है कि सिद्धार्थ ने तस्वीर और कैनवस इतनी खूबसूरती से पेश किया है कि मेरा काम उन्होंने बहुत आसान कर दिया है। वर्ल्ड प्रेस रैंकिंग, वर्ल्ड फ्रीडम रैंकिंग, एक और इंडेक्स, एक और हिसाब किताब जिसमें अनुमान लगाए गए हों और रैंकिंग्स तैयार की गई हों, इसका आखिर हमारी ज़िंदगी से क्या ताल्लुक़ हो सकता है? हो सकता है ये एक और कोई रैंकिंग हो। लेकिन आपसे मैं आज वर्ल्ड प्रेस फ्रीडम में जो भारत की गिरती हुई रैंकिंग्स हैं, the following rankings, I want to discuss that with you. But before that, I want to address the despair question, because my session is also going to be pretty dark. It is going to be filled with I cannot put in a lot of rose water, much as I'd like it to infuse it with hope and optimism. But I always go back to this very old marketing example that's given, which is what inspires me. So even if you don't have a single role model, there is this old marketing thing that two characters are sent in a country where no one wears shoes. And they're asked by a shoemaking company about should we manufacture and send them shoes or not? And they come back with dramatically different responses. One character comes back and says, of course we shouldn't make shoes, wahan koi joote hi nahi pehnta hai, no one wears shoes. The other one comes back and says, it's the market to be in because everybody needs shoes. So I think for all young journalism students, for anybody, for all of us also who are on the other end of the young spectrum, there is good enough reason to be in journalism precisely because you're needed and you do a job. Or in any case, journalism was mandated and it serves a very important function. And that is a context in which we should worry about our world press freedom rankings. First things, of course, how free earlier was a press which had paid news. So news was never free, even then it was paid. So what's the big deal about the World Press Freedom Index? I don't subscribe to a golden age theory of there being very fine journalism standards earlier and there's been a tremendous decline. But I think in all the kind of metrics of decline and all the other ebbs and issues and problems, you have a heightened problem that has happened, which has been recorded by objective matrices since 2016, where consistently press freedom, the index has been falling consistently and sharply since then. And as things stand now, of 180 countries, India is in the bottom 30. So we're at 150. And it's important to go into this for perspective because we're one rank below Turkey and they're one rank above Sudan. There are 3 African nations. There is Eritrea, Egypt, and Sudan, which are the only 3 African nations which are worse than where India is. And I'm saying this because, so that means all the other African nations are ahead of India on world press freedom. I'm saying this and singling out Africa because it's often held out as a metaphor, mistakenly held out. But even there, we don't score well. And of course, amongst all the countries we like to believe we are a part of, like all other democracies, India's score is the poorest. So the falling is a cause for great concern. How is press freedom defined by the Reporters Sans Frontières, which is this Paris-based respectable organization that evaluates press freedoms across countries? How do they define it? They define it as the ability of journalists as individuals and collectives to select, produce, and disseminate news in the public interest, independent of political, economic, legal, and social interference, and in absence of threats to their physical and mental safety. So I went into it to see what are the things that they're using to see India as being in the bottom 30 countries. And I found that there are 5 matrices that they're using. They're looking at an economic metrics, political, legislative, socio-cultural, and safety. And what is really startling is that we are somewhat rescued by India's ranking in the legislative and in the socio-cultural side. We escape falling into the really bad, very bad sector because of our performance there. But in terms of journalistic safety, India is in the bottom 18. So we're at rank 138 there. So, sorry, not 138 no, we're lower there. Amongst in the bottom 18 of the index. So that's really, that's the framework in how low India has got down to. So there is a very favorite political scientist that I read called John Keane, and he studies despotism and history very closely, and he's just come up with a very nice short book I'd recommend to everybody called The History of Democracy. And in that, he very clearly and very categorically says that the entire democratic journey of the Western liberal model, if you like, however limited that may be or whatever, owes its existence to the existence of the newspaper. So when you have cheaply available printed material coming at regular intervals, which is available to everybody, that is what provides the kind of pool in which everybody swims and is able to make decisions. So it is that allows for decisions, debates, and yet a consensus and an agreement, and you have this idea of a democracy. He, of course, tells a darker story after that the kind of technology being used to disseminate information after that is destroying that, and it's going to directly have a bearing and destroy democracy. So I'll try and present 3 or 4 reasons why this should matter to us beyond the safety of the journalist who is kind of at risk. So a journalist or an RTI activist being shot down, a Gauri Lankesh being killed, should worry us all much more than it currently does when we think of just a journalist being unfree. Well, the first thing is that anything that happens to a journalist today is going to happen to the citizen of India tomorrow. And I don't say that rhetorically. I say that because journalistic freedom is not cited out separately in the Constitution of India as freedoms that the press is owed. It derives from Article 19(1)(a), which is the freedom of speech and expression which all citizens have. So you're free to write, express yourself, and be a journalist only because Indian citizens are free. So once you have circumscribed lives and freedoms are being cut back of journalists, it's going to travel to you. It's going to come to every citizen. So that's the first reason that you're not very far away. The journalist is free because Indian citizens are free. So that freedom is being, if there's a stranglehold, if that is being limited, it's going to come to citizens. And then, of course, the other thing is that the basis being used for journalistic, for determining journalistic freedoms, the social, economic, safety, political, legislative, are all things that go into the making of any democracy. So we know if those are in so much trouble, then democracy is in trouble. And I think that's kind of borne out by the VDEM index, which calls us an electoral autocracy, by Freedom House, which calls us partly free, the international idea, which says that civil liberties in India are at the level they were in 1975, when there was a formal emergency in place. So I just want to go down like the 4 basic things that the press is meant to do in India. Siddharth's already spoken eloquently about it, but just to sort of recap and put it in a nutshell, there are 4 basic functions of the press. One is, of course, to inform people, to give the news. Number 2 is to create some kind of a forum for discussion. I use the word discussion, not necessarily debate or the big fight. It's a discussion. Number 3 is accountability for what's happening. And number 4 is financial accountability. So on all 4 things, let's go down and see what an unfree press in India has done. The press currently, as it stands, mainstream media, legacy media, with the exception of some very small digital kind of outfits who are doing their bit, who are struggling against the general trend, are all circumscribed by the collapsing economy, their own inability to have, say, the print model not being able to survive in the digital age, the dependence on advertisements, the dependence on sponsors. So all this is coming in a context which is why you have an already unfree press, which didn't really need the the weight of the state to diminish the freedom. But there's all of that happening. And then you have a government which comes back to power with a supermajority, which is doing very well, which comes back with an increased majority. So what does that do to a newsroom of 6 and 7 people? They look at what they do, and they look and see the crowds of millions who are going to listen to the leader. And that does kind of, it scares and it does diminish confidence of most journalists. And they wonder that I'm sitting here and writing this editorial or doing this story, and look at this super popular prime minister or council of ministers, not of course realizing that that's your only job. I mean, that was the job in the fairy tale of the child to kind of point out and say that the emperor wasn't wearing clothes that day to the market. So that's your job of being small and of being there. But what I'm trying to say is that economics, technology, and this a powerful big mandate executive has a way of sort of drawing a noose around a free press's neck anyway. And in that, let's see how the Indian press has performed. When it comes to giving information, I'm sure you've looked at all sort of economic data that has been flying around. There's been very distressing economic numbers, whether it's unemployment, the crashing rupee. But I've actually seen a pink paper report the crashing rupee on page 8. One pink paper didn't even, and there was some small brief there. Unemployment, I think it took months and days of unemployment to even make it to the pages. Even now you have prominent kind of journalists, very respected editors going on about how the rupee is, how the dollar is strengthening against all other currencies, and citing America vis-a-vis, vis-a-vis inflation versus India without any sense of proportionality, only in order to be able to kind of just diffuse the news, the bad economic news that stares at us. Look at income inequality. There is a great lionizing of whoever is rich, the big CEO culture. There was a time when young women would come up and they wanted to marry the smart and handsome young man. Now they want to marry the richest guy with the best salary. So who's responsible for kind of setting up the CEO as the sort of hero? That's been years of the press's making, and even now you have one or two prominent industrial houses who are sort of making the most of government policy. There are linkages there which can be explored, but who is kind of exploring them? I mean, which news agency, which newspaper is actually going out and doing that? So I'm not saying this as like a quibble of an outsider, of somebody who's no longer in that kind of a mainstream setup, but I'm stretched to see those stories about speaking of our policies on ports, or talking about one big business house skimming the kind of cream of that cup. And it's kind of natural because a lot of the media now is also owned directly by business houses. So they're actually reporting on those business houses while they are owned by them. So you see the structural constraint, and you see how the freedom is actually coming down. But anyway, reverting to the thing about how the absence of crucial information about economy affects people is as follows. I'm a person, and my life has gone to dogs. I've lost my job. My bahu doesn't have a job. My son is out on a limb. I think of it as personal misery. I have to rush. I'm a dihadi mazdoor, or I'm like a singer somewhere, or I do some work every day. I don't have the time to go into the politics of news. So I'll see what the newspaper or television is telling me, and I'll accept it. So the job of the media to actually join the dots on all of this, to convey it very clearly about what's going on, to convey it, to create a reasonable, argumentative, arguing, and a conscious public is the media's job. However informed I may think I am, I skim the headlines and I look, and I don't realize that this is not my personal misfortune. It's part of a much bigger trend. So that is a direct impact of not being able to tell the story on economy and in the way that's affecting public reasoning and how people are turning out as citizens. The other thing is, of course, the creation of an atmosphere of discussion. It is media's bounden responsibility, and I'm sure you've read it in all your textbooks, to create an environment where opposing viewpoints can be discussed. There can be room for cogent argument and debate sometimes. But we have only the big fight. So there'll be A versus B, and we'll go after each other. So it's going to be like WWE or WWF. Let's just destroy each other. Without a reasonable argument, without analysis, Analysis, I think, is also on the wane. That's not happening. So how on earth are we expecting a citizenry, how are we expecting voters of tomorrow to take shape if they are not, A, getting information, they are not even getting a forum for debate? There is a Krurdarshan, I'm sure you follow Krurdarshan, they constantly evaluate debates, and I think they studied 150 debates in the month of May 2020, and they studied it across 5 big mainstream TV channels, and they found 138 of those were Hindu-Muslim, and I think there were about 9 which had to do with, they were pro-BJP, pro-ruling party kind of debates, and there were 3 on the law of sedition. That's in May. And then there is another very interesting institute that goes by the name of Perception Studies, which has a brilliant thin red line series. What they do is that they put out pie charts where they study several thousands of seconds of TV coverage, and what they find is that the news is always a thin red line. So whether it's LPG price rise, whether it's the Assam floods at a time when lakhs of people are displaced, it gets like 16 seconds, or 0.0013 of the time. And what's the rest of the time filled with? All non-debate issues. So while you're calling it the debate, you're calling it the big fight, you're doing anything but creating a room where somebody, even if it's in a minority of 2 or 3, has the guts to come up, and that view is aired, and a space is provided for competing viewpoints. What are we doing to our democracy if you have the debate and discussion completely snuffed out? And of course, when it comes to accountability, one has heard anchors actually ask the Congress party, which is completely down on its knees in that particular state, about what they're doing for inflation. So I'm all for going after opposition parties, and we must completely look at them and look at their state and their poor state. But to be able to fix accountability clearly about who's responsible for, as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. So people who have great power need to be quizzed about that responsibility, right? Where do we have that? So in the absence of information, in the absence of a forum of debate, and in the absence of fixing accountability, if I'm just going to go after the Congress spokesman for something that chap has absolutely no remit on, he's sitting on the sidelines or she's sitting on the sidelines, we can go on kind of criticizing them. Or I'll call 6 people for the debate, of which 3 are supposed to be pro, 3 are supposed to be anti. Mike's out. Or I'll just make sure that people are screaming so much, or I'm just not letting that particular viewpoint play. So that's how an unfree press works. So on that also, I think our entire media as a whole, and I'm talking about the huge media juggernaut, as it were, which is there, all of the information space, that's sort of behaving. Number 4, financial accountability. What happened to financial accountability of the government? In fact, I was doing some research for something else, and I stumbled onto something which which news had escaped me as well. The New Indian Express had put in an RTI on the functioning of the CAG. And if you recall, the CAG, Mr. Vinod Rai's amazing kind of and very valued reports on the coal scam, on 2G, were in color printed, brilliant press conferences were held and they were given out, and Sheila Dikshit's demise, and I think to a lot of ways, UPA too got properly knocked down, as they should have, for the corruption because of the proactive thing of the CAG. But the New Indian Express found that as opposed to 55 CAG reports in 2015, in 5 years they were down to 15. There's a particular year when there were 0 defense reports. And these are reports dealing with central government and ministries. And even now, the reports are down by 75% in just 5 years. So there's a double financial accountability thing happening here. The top financial watchdog is not doing his job, is not doing their job, and I don't even know about this absence of financial accountability. So what kind of a citizen is going to be there if I just, 50 years from now on, I look at the newspapers and what they say about 2G and what they say about it now? So by the fact of the media not really being on the ball there, or willfully looking away, or just being busy, being unfree, being so shackled as not to be able to put out financial accountability that needs to be put in. Of course, there are sort of large reasons for this. There is also a degree of, there are sections of the media which feel, and I mean proprietors and top editors, who feel that what's happening, the kind of government we have, the way things are done, and they genuinely have personal respect for that and for that ideology, believe that it should be done that way. So one must not also just look at it as, a lot of it is kind of, I'm being held hostage because I want to be held hostage. A lot of it is not, they don't even need a lot of pressure. But a lot of pressure is building up because of the way government is coming down hard and heavy, as Siddharth said, on all those numerous instances of people losing their lives, and those who don't lose their lives lose their freedoms. There are FIRs for just asking a question. But I think somewhere there is a great, I get reinforced by my sense of potential power that we all have as journalists when you see that the Prime Minister has not addressed a single press conference in 8 years, because it tells me that there is power in the question. It's important to ask that question, so keep asking it, because there is something about a question that is so dangerous that it will not be faced. So it's really important to ask that question. So I think media needs to ask that question, because in the absence of all of this, it is directly impinging on the kind of citizenry that we are producing. More than 60% of India is under the age of 29. And if that, you grow up not thinking what your school teacher is telling you, what your parents are telling you, you grow up with a sense of that's your sort of operating system. You're in the whole space around you that and media provides. So if our youngsters are going to be groomed in that kind of fluid of information, that's what we'll be breathing, sipping, drinking, and believing, you can imagine how it impacts on citizenry and will directly impinge on the quality of democracy. Why a young demographic is even more dangerous is that you're all the grandfathers, you're all the Uncle Gs of another 10, 12 years, right? So you're going to hold on to this point of view or to this sort of worldview that you're told for a long, long time to come, which is why it has deep implications on how India is. A lot of people think that a free press is a luxury, you know, some chaps in Sweden have it and all. But as a friend of mine put it, this is not like some kind of Netflix or Amazon menu, ki ye dikha rahe hain, ab ye film off ho gayi. The free press is not something you're going to have with your samosa or you have it with faluda or not. It is vital. It's something that you are owed. It's your right. If India is a democracy, it claims to be a democracy, our constitution says that we're one, then we must demand a free press. We must unshackle ourselves and be there to sort of ask for freedom and safety from the mob, from government, from the law, when we are telling the truth. Of course,